The fifth Power Five conference is apparently opting back in as well. But let me ask you this. You obviously get a chance as you do your prep for games. You get to talk to players and coaches, and it's obviously sign of the times, right? Now you're doing it via Zoom and via phone calls where maybe you do it on site when you were calling games. What are you hearing from coaches and players? How are they adjusting to the season so far? And what are the biggest challenges that you're hearing from them as they kind of approach kind of the wait and see game, as each week comes around?
Each team has dealt with it differently because they've been hit with it differently. Take a team I did last week, Louisiana Tech, coached by Skip Holtz. I mean, they were basically decimated to the point where it was just their first game last week, and they pulled out a last-second win. But, I mean, Coach Holtz talks about in January he likes to have his schedule set for the entire season, and he had it, and then COVID hit. And 5 times in March he had to change his schedule and then couldn't do another schedule until June. Coaches love to have their schedule. I heard players initially when we talked to them, they said what initially happened, they really just called it annoying. But then as they saw how serious this was going on around the country, then around the world, they really were like, oh, okay, this is some serious stuff that we need to really understand the protocols that we're doing. And for colleges, it was a little different because when they kind of reported in June for those off-season programs, it was almost like a bubble for them. They were almost safer there than maybe at home if they went out in their communities because they were all together and were getting tested all the time. Quite honestly, it was when the students came back to the schools is when you started seeing some outbreaks in some places, when you got to kind of college living again. So to have to deal with that, UCF, their opponent this week, ECU, had 2 pauses, one in July and one in August because of some positive tests. And a lot of times the frustrating part can be if you test positive, that's one thing, you have to be isolated. But then in contact tracing, if you were found to be in contact with that person, there are times you have to quarantine longer than the person that tested positive. So there are, like I said, players that were just annoyed with the protocols, but after a while understood the importance of them. But you have to, I think most people are, but I'll talk from an athlete side because I was one basically all my life. You're a creature of habit. After the season starts in college football or you finish your season, you do winter workouts. After winter workouts, you do spring ball. And then you go home for a couple of weeks and then you come back for summer voluntary camp. And then in August, you start hitting. Well, I mean, look what happened this year. Everybody's spring ball got messed up. When some people didn't even come back for summer camp, and if you did, you had to work out in like groups of 4. You couldn't even put pads on at the normal time. Everybody kind of got thrown off their schedule, so everybody had to adjust to that. And it can be a damning thing at times. The ones who adapt better and understand that you have to deal with this and make the best of it are usually the ones that are going to come out the best.
Mike, UCF fans were very optimistic coming into this season. With the Big Ten and the Pac-12 supposedly not participating, we thought this was going to be our best chance to make the top 4 and qualify for the playoff. How much does the news of the Big Ten returning and now the Pac-12 coming back hurt UCF or really any other of these G5 programs that might go undefeated this year?
Oh, it absolutely hurts them. We know it. We've seen it. We've seen it happen time and time again. Certainly UCF has seen it. So, yeah, it's going to hurt. But what's going to be interesting to me is at some point the committee is going to have to decide, is there a minimum number of games you have to play to be considered for the college football playoffs? Because you're talking about the Pac-12 having a 7-game schedule. So if a Pac-12 goes 7-0 and there's a conference that plays 11 games and someone's 10-1 and they played 4 more games and have 1 loss, do you take a 7-0 team? And look at the Big Ten. They're going to play 9 games right now, but they have 0 wiggle room. Like we've already seen some teams have to postpone and can make up games, like Notre Dame and Wake Forest. They couldn't play this week. They're going to reschedule and play December 12th. They have a little bit of cushion because of when they started. The Big Ten doesn't. So what if one of the top teams, say Ohio State, has to miss a game? What if they now have 8 games? How many games is enough to say we should be counted toward or in the vote for the college football playoffs? I don't envy you. I have said when I'm done working in the media, I want to be on the playoff committee. I really think I would enjoy that. I love watching film. I love watching games, and I actually think I could do a pretty good job there. Plus, I hear the buffets are really good, the catered meals in there. But, I mean, I don't envy them this year. They have a tough job. And I think it's got to start with, do you have to give a minimum number of games for you to even be considered to go into the college football playoffs?
We saw Major League Baseball this year, even after they threw out the first pitches of some games, they changed the playoff rules. They added teams to the playoffs. Do you think it's possible for the playoff to still be expanded this season? Is it too late for them to make that change?
That's a technical question I don't have the answer for because of the bowls involved and the money involved. So I would like to say in this year, you should be able to kind of be flexible with everything. And if you think that's something that could help in this situation, to do it. So I certainly would be for it. I have been one of those as a proponent to expand the playoff at some point. And we know as far as contracts and the such, they can't really do it for a number of years. But that actually is a great question. In this year, because you'll have conferences and teams with different amount of games, would that be the fair way to do it instead of excluding it? To include them, but expand it. I wish I had a better answer for you than that. I think that is a great question to ask. If you want to pin me down for an answer, I would probably say it would still be just 4 teams.
It seems like the perfect time to do it. So it makes too much sense, really. And plus, these bowl games may not be having fans in the stands.
No.
Would they still even have those bowl games?
Oh, I have a hard time believing there's going to be bowl games. Already you see bowl sponsors switching yearly because they're not making enough money or it's not worth their investment to it. So now if you can't have fans come down to the bowl game, spend money around the city in the area, and then buy tickets for the games, I would find it very, very hard to believe that you're going to have many bowl games this year.
This season, we've already seen 3 Sun Belt teams knock off Big 12 teams. We saw what UCF did to Georgia Tech last week. Outside of Clemson, the ACC really hasn't been that great in a while now. Do you see the gap closing between the G5 and the P5? And is it time we stop using those labels for these teams?
That won't happen, unfortunately. I know what you're saying because you're one in that group, but I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, there's the talk now is that the Power 5 would actually break away from the NCAA. I don't see that happening because I don't think those commissioners can all get on the same page. Hell, they couldn't get on the same page in this. They all kind of did their own thing because that's what the NCAA said. Hey, we want all the players to be safe, and you conferences decide what you want to do. They just kind of washed their hands of it all, left it up to the conferences, and the Power Fives couldn't even all get together for that. So I eventually don't think they're going to break apart. And no, I don't think it will ever be more encompassing of other conferences. I think it will be the Power 5. And listen, I guess unless you get a consistent number of years where the Power 5, the lower ones in the conferences are getting knocked off by non-Power 5 conferences, then you can maybe see it. Understand this year what happened with the Big 12, and I did one of those games. Louisiana beat Iowa State a couple of weeks ago. I think a lot of people are going to chalk it up to this year and just teams that were hit with COVID and weren't ready in time. I think when this year ends, a lot of people, while we'll probably, if we can make it through the season, we'll crown a national champion. I just think by the time we get to next year, people are all going to say, let's forget last year and what happened and kind of start anew.
Mike, let's talk about UCF for a second here. So here's a program since 2017. We've gone 35-4. We've been to 2 New Year's Six bowl games. We've finished every season ranked in the top 25. Yet it feels like it's a program that is still fighting for respect, particularly on sort of the national level or scale. I guess kind of a two-parter. A, why do you think that is? And B, what do you think UCF needs to do to sort of start to really kind of earn and get that respect that they're seeking?
I don't think there's anything they can do because teams aren't going to want to play them. See, you see what some of the non-Power 5s do is they schedule the big-time Power 5s early in the season. And because they were their own worst enemy because they were so good. Now, what Power 5 wants to schedule them early on? Take the chance of losing to them. So they're in a tough spot. They don't get the respect they should get because they're not playing a Power 5 schedule. So everybody says, oh yeah, but look at the conference they're playing in. And they could be like, well, fine, we want to play some Power 5s, but like I said, Power 5s in their non-conference games probably don't want to schedule UCF. So outside of them getting to, I'll say it this way, if the system stays the same way it is, they and every other non-Power 5 team is basically screwed, because we've seen them go undefeated and we've seen them get left out. And if you can't get a game with the big boys to show, hey, I can play at Ohio State, or I can play in Alabama, or I can play at Clemson, outside of the conference, and win that game, that would be the thing that would raise some eyebrows. So the only other thing I would say, again, if the system stays the same as it is, would be UCF trying to get into a Power 5 conference.
Well, from your perspective, what is the perception of UCF in the national media, right? I'm not going to ask you to defend and litigate all of the national media guys who make comments, and, Booger McFarland rolled his eyes the other day when he talked about UCF not being in the Florida Big Three. I guess, what do you, from your standpoint, obviously doing, national radio for so many years, what is your, or what do you think the perception is of UCF out there?
My perception, my thought process of them is they deserve a shot to see if they can belong, but the system won't let them in. I don't know what they would do. I mean, I love watching them play. I mean, God knows you can't go get a snack when their offense is on the field, or you could miss a scoring drive, since most of them are under 3 minutes anyway. So listen, when it was first happening and everybody was, certainly I understood UCF fans, saying we deserve it. I was one of those skeptical ones soon saying, yeah, but you're not playing anybody. But then I would sit there and think, well, it's not their fault. It's the conference they're in. And the more they win, the more the big-time schools won't want to play them out of conference. So they're stuck in a vicious cycle that's not their fault, of being too good and not being in a Power 5 conference. So my perception of them is I would like to see them get a chance against the top teams to see what they could do. And I have no idea what to expect when they would get up there. I honestly don't. They could be in a game and win it, or they could get knocked off the field. I honestly don't know. But we won't know until it happens, and that's why we keep trying to say, can they get in there? That is one of the reasons I would like to see the playoffs expanded, because there is usually one or two non-Power 5s that are really good each year that we're saying, God, if they had a chance. And to me, expanding the playoffs at least will give a team like a UCF a chance. And then we can see. All players want to do, listen, when this was decided by the polls, it was the way it was when I was playing. That's the way it was. But you're letting writers and media people decide who's number one, right? I mean, players want to decide that stuff on the field. So you go on the field, you win all your games, and then you're still not invited to the party at the end. I can understand the players and the fans all saying, well, what the hell are we supposed to do? So that's why I say, expand the playoffs and give those teams a chance. Say, okay, here you go. You're now in the playoffs. You're right where you want to be. Let's see what you got.
Even if we did get in the playoffs and say we got blown out, everybody would use that against us, but that doesn't stop them from saying anything about Oklahoma, who gets blown out in the playoffs every year.
I agree.
Florida State lost by 50 to Oregon one time.
Hell, Notre Dame got blown out a year as well. I agree with you. But you know what the perception is? And that's going to be the perception. Well, they didn't belong. Well, because you're right. Oklahoma out of the Big 12 is making the playoffs, but they get blown out in the playoffs. So I agree with everything you're saying, yet the perception will still be, oh, they got their chance and they got blown out, so they don't belong. And unfortunately, that won't change. Unfortunately, that's kind of the lot the non-Power 5 conferences are in right now.
All right, so you've been doing some research leading up to the game this week, watching the UCF film. What's caught your eye watching that game against Georgia Tech last week?
Well, I mean, obviously, Dylan Gabriel and what he did, throwing for over 400 yards for the first time and 4 touchdowns. He had himself a hell of a game. It's a fun offense to watch, just seeing the ball get spread around the way it does. I know Marlon Williams was mostly the recipient with his 10 catches. But I love that pace, because I love the chess match, the pace they're going to have, because you could actually see Georgia Tech not being set on defense, or getting caught with not enough players on defense, or not being able to converse enough with each other to be ready at the snap. And that's what this tempo tries to do. It not only wants to out-execute you, but it wants to have you confused right out of the gate. And that's what happens on defense. You could have 9, 10 guys playing the right way, 1 or 2 guys not. You're going to get nailed. You're going to get crushed. So that's what UCF likes to do, and they have the talent to back it up. So I love watching that on the